For over 8 decades, this document remained sealed, hidden away not by governments or religious institutions, but by those who feared its truth was too powerful for humanity to bear. When Edgar Cayce's final trance recordings were transcribed, certain passages were marked, not for public release. Today, these forbidden revelations come to light. The year was 1944. World War II raged across continents. While humanity was consumed with external battles, a different kind of revelation was unfolding in a quiet room in Virginia Beach. There, a small group gathered around a man lying perfectly still on a simple couch. They came not as spectators, but as witnesses to something that defied conventional understanding. They came for truth. He was known as America's sleeping prophet, a simple man from Kentucky with no medical training, no theological education, who discovered within himself a gift that defied explanation. When Edgar Cayce closed his eyes and entered a trance state, something extraordinary happened. His consciousness traveled beyond the boundaries of physical existence and accessed realms that few have witnessed firsthand. Unlike psychics who claimed to communicate with the dead, Cayce appeared to access a universal field of knowledge, a cosmic library containing not just information about the present and past, but insights into the very nature of consciousness itself. His accuracy in diagnosing medical conditions for people thousands of miles away had already been documented thousands of times. But what happened on that particular day was different. The small group noticed it immediately. His breathing changed, becoming deeper than in his usual trance state. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that several witnesses later reported seeing their breath in the air in Virginia Beach in summer. Most unsettling was the change in his voice. Those who had attended hundreds of readings had never heard this tone before, resonant, ancient, with a quality that one witness described as the sound of time itself speaking. What he revealed in the next 62 minutes would be transcribed, studied by his closest associates, and then by unanimous decision sealed away from public view, not because it contradicted religious teachings, though it challenged many, not because it defied scientific understanding, though it expanded beyond material paradigms. It was sealed because, as one witness wrote in her private journal, "Some truths are seeds that must wait for the right season to be planted. There is no death," he stated with absolute certainty, "only transition. When the soul leaves the physical vessel, it experiences not an ending but an expansion, a return to its true nature. The greatest deception humanity has embraced is the belief that we are merely physical beings having occasional spiritual experiences, when the truth is precisely the opposite." As Cayce continued speaking, he described with extraordinary precision what happens in the moments after physical death, not as theory or religious doctrine, but with the clarity of direct observation. He spoke of how consciousness expands rather than diminishes, how perception becomes more acute rather than ceasing, how the soul's journey continues in dimensions beyond physical limitation. The veils that separate dimensions are not barriers, he explained, but filters designed to allow souls to focus on particular lessons in particular realms. Death is simply the lifting of one such veil, not an end, but a continuation, not a darkness, but an illumination. What makes this particular revelation different from Cayce's thousands of other readings is not just the content, but the manner in which it was delivered. Witnesses described him speaking with an urgency, an almost desperate need to ensure these words would eventually reach those ready to hear them. It was as if he foresaw the document's suppression and embedded within it codes of understanding that would resonate only when the collective consciousness was prepared. "This knowledge is not for your time," he said at one point, addressing not just those in the room, but seemingly speaking to future generations. "It is for an age when humanity stands at the threshold of remembering its true nature, when the old paradigms have begun to crumble, but the new understanding has not yet fully emerged. Guard these words until the signs appear, when technology connects minds across the planet, when the ancient barriers between nations begin to fall, when humanity begins to recognize the damage it has done to its planetary home, and when the children begin to be born with memories and abilities that previous generations suppressed. Those present were startled to see something unprecedented during Cayce's thousands of documented trance states, tears streaming down his face, though his expression remained serene. When later questioned about this anomaly, Cayce himself had no recollection of crying, suggesting that what his consciousness encountered was so profound it transcended his normal emotional barriers. "I remember only light," he said when asked what he had experienced. "Light so pure that it has no opposite, love so complete that it contains all experiences, even those we label as suffering. I remember feeling as if I had finally returned to a home I had always known but somehow forgotten." What exactly did Edgar Cayce witness in the realms beyond physical death that moved him to tears? What truth was deemed too overwhelming for the public consciousness of his time? And why does this message resurface now, at this precise moment in human history? The document remained sealed in the archives, accessed only by a handful of researchers over the decades. Some who read it reported profound shifts in their understanding, with one noting in 1967. These words do not merely convey information, they carry a frequency that alters the consciousness of the reader. They are not merely describing dimensions beyond physical reality, they are a bridge to experiencing them directly. In 1994, exactly 50 years after the reading was given, a small group gathered to determine whether humanity was ready for these revelations. They concluded that the time had not yet come. Again, in 2014, the question was revisited. This time, the decision was less unanimous. Some felt the collective consciousness had evolved sufficiently. Others were not convinced. Then came an unexpected development. In late 2023, a researcher working with the original recordings discovered something that had been missed for nearly 8 decades. Beneath the primary audio track, barely perceptible even with modern technology, was a second voice track. It was Cayce's voice, but speaking simultaneously on 2 levels, delivering 2 messages at once. The technology to detect this hadn't existed in his lifetime. When isolated and enhanced, this secondary voice track contained a clear directive. The time of revelation is not determined by years but by readiness. When you discover this message within the message, you will know that the moment for unveiling has arrived. The answer lies not in conspiracy, but in the evolution of human understanding. Cayce reportedly said, "Truth is not hidden from humanity. Humanity is simply not yet ready to recognize truth when it stands before them." Perhaps now, as the veils between dimensions grow increasingly transparent, we are finally prepared for what he saw. What follows is a complete, unedited transcription of Edgar Cayce's banned revelation about what happens after death, not as theological conjecture, but as direct observation from a consciousness that temporarily resided beyond the boundaries of physical limitation. These are not beliefs asking to be accepted on faith. They are experiences inviting you to resonate with a truth your soul may have always known. "I have witnessed the moment of transition thousands of times," Cayce spoke in that resonant voice, that witnesses said seemed to fill the room, yet simultaneously felt as intimate as a whisper. "I have observed not just the physical process, but the journey of consciousness as it releases its identification with form." According to Edgar Cayce's forbidden accounts, the moment of death is nothing like what most religious or scientific paradigms have led us to believe. It is neither a dramatic judgment nor a descent into oblivion. Instead, the soul experiences a gentle release, a sensation Cayce described as exhaling after holding one's breath for too long. The first sensation, he explained, is not of loss but of profound relief. Think of how it feels when you have carried a heavy backpack for miles and finally set it down. The body, which most identify as themselves, is actually a limitation, a necessary vehicle for certain kinds of experiences, but ultimately a temporary focusing of consciousness into form. In those initial moments after physical death, the soul finds itself in what Cayce called the state of becoming aware. Consciousness does not diminish or disappear. Rather, it expands beyond the limitations previously imposed by the physical brain. Time no longer flows linearly, but exists as an eternal present, where past, future, and now merge into a unified experience. The transition varies in its initial stages, Cayce detailed. Those who die suddenly without preparation often experience a period of confusion, not suffering but disorientation. They may not immediately realize they have departed physical form. They attempt to communicate with loved ones, to interact with the physical world, and are puzzled by their inability to make contact. This confusion, Cayce emphasized, is temporary. Souls who die in conflict, anger, or with strong attachment to physical existence may remain in this state longer, but guides are always present, waiting for the moment when awareness begins to dawn. For those who die consciously with an understanding of the transition process, this confusion is minimal or non-existent. The newly released soul, Cayce revealed, first notices not a bright light or tunnel as commonly described, but a profound sense of self-recognition. It is as if you are truly seeing yourself for the first time, not your physical appearance, but your essence, your true nature, beyond all identities and roles played in earthly existence. Cayce described in extraordinary detail how the soul begins to perceive itself without the filters and limitations of physical existence. Consciousness expands in all directions simultaneously. Memories become vivid and multidimensional, not just recalling events, but re-experiencing their emotional and energetic essences. Imagine, he said, being able to perceive not just with 5 senses but with thousands. Imagine understanding without needing language, communicating without speech, moving without traversing space. The soul remembers that these abilities were always its natural state, and the limitations of physical existence begin to seem like a distant dream. This self-recognition can be both beautiful and terrifying, for in this state there is no capacity for self-deception. Every thought, every intention, every action taken during physical life is not judged, but simply understood in its complete context and consequence. The soul sees not only what it did, but the ripple effects of those actions through the lives of others. This is what Cayce referred to as the reflection, not a punishment, but the soul's first step toward integration of its earthly experiences. The life review, Cayce elaborated, is not a passive watching of events like a film. It is a complete re-experiencing of your entire life with one profound difference. You feel not only your own emotions, but simultaneously the emotions of everyone you interacted with. You experience the effects of your kindness, your cruelty, your presence, your absence. You feel the joy you created and the pain you caused, not as judgment, but as truth. This review occurs outside linear time. The soul may spend what would be perceived as centuries examining a single moment of profound significance, or move quickly through years of routine existence. There is no rush, no schedule, only the natural rhythm of understanding and integration. Cayce described how souls who lived with love, compassion, and service experienced this reflection as a symphony of light and harmony. Those who lived in fear, hatred, or caused deliberate harm to others do not face external judgment but experience their own actions through the feelings of those they affected. This is not hell in the traditional sense, but a profound learning, a mirror that cannot be turned away from. I observed a man who had been cruel throughout his life, Cayce recounted. After death, he experienced every moment of pain he had inflicted, not as punishment, but as direct knowledge. I watched as he collapsed in what might be called cosmic remorse. Yet surrounding him were beings of light, supporting him through this recognition, never condemning, only loving. For even this experience was not retribution but healing, the beginning of his soul's rehabilitation. Cayce emphasized repeatedly that no soul is beyond redemption, No action is beyond ultimate healing. There is no punishment, Cayce insisted, during that controversial reading. There is only understanding, and within that understanding lies the seed of transformation. The soul that has caused harm does not suffer eternally, but experiences exactly what it created, not as retribution, but as education. What follows this initial reflection is perhaps the most contested aspect of Cayce's banned messages, the revelation that souls are not alone in this transition. According to his accounts, each soul is met by those with whom they shared the deepest connections, not just from their most recent life, but from all previous existences. These connections transcend familial relationships as we understand them. A soul might be met by someone who was a bitter enemy in one life, but a beloved teacher in another. I have witnessed the reunion of souls who had been separated by death, Cayce said, his voice carrying what witnesses described as a quality of reverence. The recognition between them is not of the physical forms they once inhabited, but of their essential nature. A mother does not see her child as she last remembered them. She recognizes the ancient soul with whom she has danced across countless lifetimes, sometimes as mother and child, sometimes as siblings, sometimes as strangers whose paths briefly crossed. These reunions, Cayce explained, often reveal the purpose. Behind relationships that seemed difficult or painful in physical life, the soul that played the role of an abuser may be recognized as one who agreed to provide a challenging catalyst for growth. The seeming enemy is revealed as a soul who loved so deeply that it accepted a role that would provide exactly the resistance needed for the other's evolution. The presences that greet the transitioning soul are not there to judge, but to comfort and guide. They appear not in physical form, but as what Cayce described as vibrational signatures, recognizable by their essential energy rather than any appearance. In that moment of recognition, all previous relationships are understood in their true context as part of a vast tapestry of soul evolution. Among those who meet the soul, Cayce continued, are beings who have never incarnated in physical form. These are entities whose evolutionary path has taken different directions, who serve as way showers and guides. Some religious traditions have called them angels, though this term carries misconceptions. They are neither superior nor separate from human souls. They are simply specialized in their function of guidance and transition assistance. These guides help the newly transitioned soul navigate its expanded awareness, adjusting to the vastly different mode of existence beyond physical form. They assist in the life review process, help the soul understand the lessons of its completed incarnation, and eventually guide it toward the next phase of its journey, whether that be another physical incarnation or advancement to different realms of experience. The greatest surprise for most souls, Cayce revealed, is discovering that those they believed were separate from themselves, friends, family, even adversaries, are in fact aspects of a greater unified consciousness. The boundaries that seemed so definite in physical life dissolve, revealing connections that have always existed beyond the veil of forgetting. This revelation about the interconnected nature of consciousness was considered particularly sensitive by those who originally suppressed the document. It directly challenged the foundational paradigm of separation upon which much of human society, economics, and religious doctrine had been built. The implications were too radical, the potential disruption to established power structures too significant to allow this understanding to spread prematurely. I observed a woman, Cayce recounted, who had lived in bitter enmity with her sister throughout her life. At the moment of transition, she recognized that the conflict that had defined their relationship was actually a carefully choreographed dance they had planned before incarnation, each providing the other with precisely the resistance needed to develop specific qualities. In the light of expanded awareness, their seeming hatred was revealed as a profound act of love. This recognition of the larger purpose behind earthly relationships does not deny or invalidate the suffering experienced in physical life. Rather, It contextualizes that suffering within a broader framework of soul evolution. Pain is not rationalized away, but understood as one of many catalysts for growth in an infinite journey of becoming. The soul does not forget the suffering it experienced or caused, Cayce emphasized. It integrates that suffering into a more complete understanding. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is without purpose, though that purpose may be recognizable only from the perspective of expanded awareness beyond physical limitation. Edgar Cayce's suppressed transcripts describe in extraordinary detail what he called the vibrational territories of the afterlife. Unlike the simplistic heaven and hell of religious tradition, Cayce revealed a multidimensional architecture of consciousness where souls gravitate to realms that correspond precisely to their level of development and awareness. The soul does not go to a place, Cayce emphasized. It expands into a state of being that perfectly reflects its true vibration. There are no gates, no judgments, only resonance, like attracts like in the afterlife dimensions, creating communities of shared understanding and purpose. According to Cayce, these realms are not fixed locations but fluid states of consciousness, accessible through what he called attunement rather than movement through space. A soul naturally resonates with and therefore experiences the realm. That matches its own frequency, the sum total of its thoughts, intentions, and actions throughout all incarnations. The lowest vibrational territories, which Cayce referred to as the shadowlands, are not realms of punishment, but of restricted awareness. Souls who remain attached to physical pleasures, material possessions, or unresolved anger find themselves in environments that reflect these limitations. These are not eternal destinations, but temporary states where souls eventually come to recognize the constraints of their own creation. No soul remains forever in darkness, Cayce insisted. Even those who lived lives dominated by cruelty or selfishness eventually tire of their self-created limitations and begin to seek understanding. This seeking, however faint, creates the first spark of light that begins their upward journey. In the middle realms, which comprise the majority of after-death experiences, souls engage in what Cayce called the Great Review and Renewal. Here they process the experiences of their most recent incarnation, integrate the lessons learned, and begin preparation for either advancement to higher realms or reincarnation for further growth. These middle territories are richly diverse, containing what Cayce described as schools, healing centers, and communities of service. Souls gather in groups with shared purposes, often continuing work begun in physical life or preparing for collective missions in future incarnations. It is here that most souls meet their soul groups, collections of beings who journey together through many lifetimes, taking different roles in relation to one another to facilitate mutual growth. The higher vibrational realms, which Cayce sometimes called the spheres of light, are states of expanded consciousness where individuality begins to blend with universal awareness. Souls who access these realms have evolved beyond the need for reincarnation into physical forms, though many choose to return to lower dimensions as teachers and guides. In the highest realms, Cayce revealed, souls experience a state of being that human language cannot adequately describe. It is not the extinction of identity, as some Eastern philosophies suggest, nor is it the static perfection portrayed in Western religious traditions. Rather, it is a dynamic participation in creation itself, becoming co-creators with the divine source from which all consciousness emerges. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of Cayce's banned descriptions was his insistence that souls can move between these realms, ascending or descending according to their choices and development. There is no permanent assignment, no eternal heaven or hell, only the natural consequences of a soul's own vibration. The architecture of the afterlife, Cayce stated, is not designed for reward or punishment, but for growth. Every soul, regardless of its earthly actions, carries within it the divine spark that will eventually lead it home. Among the most profound revelations in Cayce's banned messages was his detailed description of what he called the Library of the Soul, more widely known today as the Akashic Records. According to Cayce, after the initial transition and reflection, periods every soul gains access to this universal repository of knowledge, though the depth of access depends on the soul's level of development. The Akashic Records are not a place, Cayce explained, but a vibrational frequency that contains the complete history of every soul's journey through all dimensions and incarnations. It is the memory of creation itself, accessible not through reading but through resonance. When a soul enters the frequency of the Akashic Records, it does not perceive information as we understand it on Earth, as separate facts or narratives. Instead, the soul experiences a direct knowing, an immediate comprehension that transcends language and linear thinking. In this state, the artificial boundaries between past, present, and future dissolve. Cayce described how souls in this state can witness not only their own previous incarnations, but also the vast, interconnected web of relationships and consequences that have shaped their journey. Most significantly, they gain access to what Cayce called the pattern, the higher purpose or blueprint that underlies their soul's evolution. Every soul comes into physical incarnation with a purpose, Cayce revealed, not a predetermined fate that cannot be altered, but a set of potentials, lessons, and contributions that the soul itself has chosen to explore. In the space between lives, when immersed in the Akashic field, the soul remembers this purpose with perfect clarity. This remembrance brings with it a profound realization that what appeared as random suffering or injustice in physical life was actually part of a larger pattern the soul itself helped design for its growth. The challenges, relationships, and even limitations of physical existence are revealed as precisely calibrated opportunities for development. There are no victims in the highest understanding, Cayce stated, a claim that many found disturbing when these transcripts were first reviewed. There is only experience, and the soul's interpretation of that experience. What appears as victimhood from the limited perspective of physical life is revealed between lives as chosen curriculum. According to Cayce, it is within this state of Akashic remembrance that souls make their most important decision, whether to reincarnate for further growth and service or to remain in non-physical realms as guides and teachers. This choice is not made in isolation, but in consultation with what Cayce called the Council of Elders, advanced souls who help others understand the implications of their choices. The decision to reincarnate, Cayce explained, is never imposed. It arises from the soul's own recognition of what remains unlearned, unhealed, or uncompleted. Some souls choose to return quickly, particularly when bound by strong connections to those still in physical form. Others may spend what would be perceived on Earth as centuries in the non-physical realms before choosing to incarnate again. Perhaps most remarkably, Cayce described how souls actively participate in designing their next incarnation, selecting not only time periods and locations, but specific challenges, relationships, and physical characteristics that will best serve their evolution. The soul chooses its parents, its basic life circumstances, and even many of the significant relationships it will encounter, Cayce stated. It does not choose every detail of the coming life. Free will remains operative in physical existence, but it establishes the framework within which that life will unfold. This concept that we are not merely passive recipients of fate, but active architects of our incarnations, was deemed too radical and potentially disruptive when these readings were first assessed. The implication that each soul bears responsibility for its circumstances challenged both religious notions of divine judgment and emerging secular views of random biological existence. The final section of Edgar Cayce's banned messages contains what his contemporaries considered the most dangerous revelation of all, the true nature of what religious traditions call the final judgment, and the ultimate destiny of every soul. According to Cayce's suppressed transcripts, there is indeed a judgment, but it bears little resemblance to the dramatic tribunal depicted in religious texts. Instead, it is a moment of complete self-knowledge, a confrontation with one's true nature that occurs not just once, but continuously throughout a soul's evolution. The judgment is not delivered by an external deity, Cayce revealed. It is the soul's own recognition of its alignment with or divergence from universal principles. In the clearest light of non-physical existence, the soul sees itself without distortion or deception. This self-judgment, according to Cayce, is simultaneously the most terrifying and the most liberating experience a soul can undergo. For those who lived in alignment with love, compassion, and service, it brings a profound sense of harmony and belonging. For those who caused suffering or remained trapped in egoic patterns, it creates not punishment, but a piercing awareness of separation from one's true nature. What makes this revelation particularly challenging to religious orthodoxy is Cayce's insistence that no soul is eternally condemned. Even those who committed the most horrific acts during physical existence ultimately begin a journey of return, though this journey may encompass countless incarnations and extended periods in lower vibrational realms. Every soul, without exception, eventually returns to the source, Cayce stated. This is not because of divine mercy that overrides justice, as some theologies suggest. It is because the divine spark at the core of every being can never be truly extinguished, only temporarily obscured by the soul's own choices. According to Cayce, this return journey follows a spiral path rather than a linear progression. Souls may advance and retreat, experience rapid growth followed by periods of apparent stagnation, incarnate in succession, or remain in non-physical realms for extended periods. Yet the overall trajectory, viewed from the highest perspective, is always toward greater awareness, expanded compassion, and deeper communion with the source of all consciousness. Perhaps most controversially, Cayce described what he called the great choice that faces souls who have reached advanced stages of development. Having completed the necessary cycles of incarnation for their own growth, these souls stand at a cosmic crossroads. They may choose to merge back into the source, what some traditions call nirvana or heaven, experiencing the bliss of complete unity, Cayce explained. Or they may choose the path of service, voluntarily returning to lower vibrational realms, even physical incarnation, to assist others in their journey. According to Cayce, this choice represents the highest expression of free will in the universe. The soul that chooses merger experiences the fulfillment of its individual journey. The soul that chooses service participates in what Cayce called the great compassion, the voluntary postponement of complete union in order to help others find their way. This is the true meaning of the concept found in many spiritual traditions, that the most advanced beings often appear as the most humble servants, Cayce stated. Having touched the highest vibration, they freely choose to return to domains of limitation, not from karma or obligation, but from love. In his final recorded statements on this subject, delivered in that remarkable 1944 session, Cayce spoke with unexpected emotion about humanity's approach to death. His words, deemed too disruptive to the prevailing paradigms of his era, now emerge as a challenge to our own understanding. Humanity fears death because it has forgotten what it knew before birth. You do not walk into darkness when the body fails. You step out of it. You are not less after death, but more. You do not lose those you have loved. You recognize the deeper bonds that have always connected you beyond physical appearance. The document ends with what witnesses described as Cayce's voice changing once again, becoming simultaneously more intimate and more universal, speaking not just to those present, but seemingly to future generations. Remember this: the journey of your soul did not begin with birth, and it will not end with death. You are not here to avoid judgment, but to recognize your own light. The greatest preparation for death is not fear, but love, for in the moment of transition, you will discover that love is the only thing you truly take with you, the only currency recognized in all realms of existence. These words, sealed away for decades, now emerge into a world perhaps finally ready to hear them, not as doctrine requiring belief, but as an invitation to remember what the soul has always known beyond the veil of forgetting.